Hey everybody, it's Sunday, which means it's stream day. Decided to start a little bit early because I hate sitting in the waiting room. Welcome back. I hope everybody's had a good week since we last did this. If I look a little wet, it's because, well, it rained on me today. Took the dog for a walk and it started raining. Actually felt kind of nice, reminded me of Washington. But yeah, it's starting to warm up around here. Anyways, not a lot of folks watching yet. We've only got two that I can see. So if you are here, go ahead and sound off. Um, Last week, I had a pretty good time talking about the Dragons book, so I thought I would take a look at another Rule Aids book in a little bit more detail rather than just quick overview. I have yet to procure any new ones since Dragons. I've sort of left the realm of the cheaper books and having to bide my time a little bit more to wait for good deals on the remaining books. Giants, for example, I have yet to find it cheaper than $30 before shipping. So that's one of the ones I really want to get. But yeah, so we'll see. Hey Grumpy, how's it going, man? So yeah, I haven't done a lot hobby wise. Let's see, last Sunday was game day. So since then, we did have game, and so I did run my fifth edition game, and we had some major realizations in the campaign, and the party finds itself kind of stuck between two threads of relatively equal importance, so they're going to have to make some choices and see how they want to pursue these. So that should be interesting to see how they handle it. One is sort of a big magical quest, and the other one is a mystery, and so they have to sort of figure out, you know, in what order to take a look at those, or if they can do them both at the same time. We'll see. Let's see. The game I'm playing in, my brother's game, which takes place on Wednesdays, I haven't been able to make it to since I got back into it. Had some stuff going on that made it kind of hard for me to get there one week, and then last week it was canceled. Um, so I don't believe we're playing this coming Wednesday either, so it'll be another week or so. Um, that said, hey Cody. Yeah, it's been kind of a low key hobby sort of a week. Um, I showed off those, or I mentioned those police robots I got last week. I've yet to start painting those. Although today, after stream, my wife and I are going to a local craft meetup, and I believe the craft I will be taking with me is miniature painting, and see if I can get some paint on those. We'll see if that works. But yeah, so other than that, not a ton going on. Um, I did come to a weird realization about Dungeon Crawl Classics the other day. Like, it calls itself Dungeon Crawl Classics, yet everything I see for that game and read about that game seems to kind of break the tropes of classic D&D and classic fantasy games. In other words, like every module I see for DCC is super weird. The way that you make characters and introduce characters into that game is not the way that you did it in classic RPGs. You're supposed to do this funnel with a bunch of zero level characters and play the ones that survive. That is not the way that they do it. They used to do it. They made up their own set of special dice. Now they have cool reasons for that. I actually kind of appreciate the reason for that. And ultimately, their whole reason for taking that tack is to basically recreate that experience of getting into D&D for the first time. When you first come into D&D, everything is weird and amazing and new and You've got funky dice and special rules. Um, and the way that it works is all kind of new and different compared to what you're doing. So DCC sets out to recreate that feel and that vibe, but I find it's kind of an ironic twist if you think about the fact that they named their game Dungeon Crawl Classics, but almost none of their modules are classic dungeon crawls, and the game um, is very much predicated on reinventing the classics. So it's kind of a weird juxtaposition. And Cody and Slam, that's um, you know, those are some of my issues there. I don't have any issue with the non-platonic solid bit. Don't feel like there's any necessity to introduce mathematical constants into uh, my stuff. But I like the D10. To be honest, I love the D10. I actually really very much like D10 systems. I feel that D10 systems fit mathematically pretty well into regular people thinking. 1 to 10 is a common frame of reference for a lot of players, a lot of people. Percentile dice is really easy to translate. I mean, if you have a percentage chance of doing something, people have a general, real quick looking at it and seeing it and understanding the percentile chance of doing something. I don't. For me, DCC is kind of a miss. The level of randomness and weirdness for the sake of it doesn't sit well with me. That's a me thing though. I mean, if people like it, cool, awesome, enjoy it, love it. But for me, it's a matter of I don't like too much randomness in my games. I mean, obviously, you need some randomness to create that drama and that dynamic play, but I also don't like a lot of heavy weirdness, at least in my fantasy RPGs. Yeah, yeah. I see, and I don't get too bothered by shapes. Um, yeah, I think Gonzo weirdness is better kept as a story and setting element as opposed to a mechanical element. I believe part of the experience of running RPGs is having a reasonable assumption and a solid idea of what your character can and can't do within the scope of the rules. And the weirdness and all of that should be in the setting. I mean, Talos Lanta is a weird ass world, but it's got a very grounded set of rules behind it. I think that's the best combination. Weirdness for weirdness sake. When the rules are weird, the game ceases to be about serious storytelling and adventuring for me and becomes more a wacky goof of its own. Like I might as well be playing Toon or Paranoia or something like that, where the whole game is supposed to be built around this weird wackiness. And I think that's what maybe DCC possibly leads into. Yeah, I mean, for example, a good example would be Gamma World. Gamma World is, for all intents and purposes, a D&D variant, mechanically speaking, but the world can be crazy or serious. We can see that the world of Gamma World is very mutable in its setting, as we've seen through the various editions of Gamma World. Each edition of Gamma World really presents a different iteration of that post-apocalypse and how weird or how serious it is. Even between first edition and second edition, we see the weirdness sort of. Whereas first edition was very much high, weird sci-fi. Second edition, which is essentially just a cleanup and a reprint of first edition, the art, however, goes with a very much more gritty, serious, almost Road Warrior meets Terminator kind of a vibe, and that's part of that comes down to the Larry Elmore art, because his style is just he's very much he's as solid a mechanical artist as he is like a landscape artist. So yeah, it works really. But that's how where that came from. Um, well, Squirrel Hermit, that's true. They can, and unfortunately, and then that's fine if you want that. But see, DCC by having rules that are wacky and a world that is wacky, the play experience just becomes a matter of slapstick for me. Um, if it were like a serious rule, so like a serious rule set and a wacky world, then there's that verisimilitude is still there, even though the world has crazy rules. But like Toon, for example, is built to reflect cartoon characters, or Paranoia is built to reflect that kind of a setting. Um, it should also be no surprise that I'm not a really big fan of Paranoia because I don't like that style of play. Though I have played Toon and I did play Teenagers from Outer Space, which was kind of a riot as well. But again, you know, you'll like what you like, and I'm not saying that people who like DCC are wrong or anything like that. It just does not sit well for me, and I don't like it. And I find it ironic that they call it Dungeon Crawl Classics, but very little about it is in line with the classic gaming experience. Hey, Mages, how's it going? Anyways, so the putting the soapbox away, thought we would take another look at Dark Folk. Dark Folk is the Mayfair Games Rule Aids supplement for humanoids. It covers specifically orcs, kobolds, goblins, gnolls, and trolls. Also, within the auspices of goblins, it covers hobgoblins as well. So I did a flip through this one before I came on here just to kind of take a look at it. And so this is a 1982 publication. It's one of the earlier books. Internal art and maps are from Gerald O'Malley, Jim Klaus, and David B. Bromley. Cover illustration is, if I can get this open again, is titled Blind Corner, copyright 1982, Jenny Wirtz. Jenny Wirtz is the author of Sorcerer's Legacy from Ace. So the cover art was done by a published fantasy author, looks like. So the book covers trolls, orcs, gnolls, kobolds, and goblins. And each of those sections has a different authoring. So Trolls was written by Paul Karchig and Steve Morrison. The Orc Culture was written by Robert Lynn Asprin. The Orcs Orcs section for the game mechanics was Les Kay. Gnolls was a collaborative endeavor from Arthur Miller and Irwin Goldstein. The adventure itself for that was by Irwin Goldstein. Kobolds was Alan Noodleman, and Goblins was Susan Cass. So actually, this is a 1983 publication, not an 82. The art was 82. So, yeah, I was wondering if Grumpy would chime in there. Yeah, so yeah, I mean, it's kind of cool that they got this cover art. And it's a pretty good cover pace. I mean, and it actually continues over onto the back. So the whole blind corner aspect really lends itself well to a book cover because you get the battle scene on the front, and then the back corner shows all of the monsters coming down the hall. So it's a very, very apt illustration. Yeah, Dirty History and Hobbies, yeah. So one thing that is cool that it almost goes under the radar if you just do a quick flip through of this. On the first page, we get this tiny little map here. That's a whole ass continent. Because they know that because they want to make these books useful, they present to you an entirely new place that you can plunk down on your campaign world, which is this continent. This continent is we've got several different islands. We've got Spider Island, Crab Island, Snowflake Island. But yeah, it's the Mammaril, Mammaril, or whatever you want to spell it, is the name of the continent. It is big enough to have multiple populations on it. Yeah, see, Grumpy, I really do like wraparound covers where the there's almost a seamless, you know, you know, element to both halves where they work as separate images, but they actually provide a greater image. So in this campaign setting, it's really neat because you get several different cities, several different locations that are all not humanoid, around which these humanoid races are placed. And one of the cool things, and this is one of the things about amongst the rest of the cool things that I love about Roll8's books, is they're always full of little mechanics, things here and there that you can use. This one actually brings in a building generation table. Now it says it's for Jovian Falls, which is like the central trade hub city. But it's a series of random roll tables that you could use to populate buildings into a town, city, village. And then it gives several different community descriptions, brief little descriptions with illustrations. Nice black and white village illustrations. Sound may have gone weird. Let me check real quick. Make sure that I don't have. No, it's not set for automatic. It's possible that it went weird because my AC just kicked in, so maybe it changed the mic pickup. I'm down in the basement next to my furnace, so we go through several descriptions of communities, and I'm not going to go into too much detail. It's just a baseline description of all the various communities. It is notable to say to point out that we do have a elven capital in here. It's the center of learning. Many different subjects that are studied and taught in the city, located deep in the heart of the Illyrian forest. So they're making a place for all of your different species. Then we go into the troll section, and we get a history of the elder troll race. I do find it interesting that the illustration of the troll here does appear to be farming, or at least digging something up, so maybe some light agriculture. Is it still wobbly, guys, or did that pass? So we then get general information about trolls. It gives you a quick reference rundown for the armor class, hit points, and numbers present in any particular group for chiefs, sub-chiefs, shamans, witch doctors, and common trolls. So that's cool. We then get descriptions of different types of trolls with different modifications. We get desert trolls, we get forest trolls, river trolls, hill trolls, mountain trolls, frozen waste trolls, dark trolls, half trolls, giant trolls, two-headed trolls, and trorks. Evidently, trorks are troll-orc crossbreeds, which are common enough to be a subspecies of their own. There is the half-breed section in here that does briefly talk about how there are mixed troll breeds where they mix with the different species between the trolls. It does mention, interestingly enough, too, though, that giant and two-headed trolls integrate into their parent societies. So, uh, they're going to be living with one or the other parent. Well, no, I mean the image. Yeah, the image. It looks like he's digging with a stick or pulling up a root. So, and he does have like a sack around his neck, so maybe he's foraging. It's possible as well. We then get a bit on troll leaderships, and oddly enough, a very weirdly placed little uh, chart right here showing the spell capabilities of the shamans. We then get a kind of really cool full page breakdown in columns of the different types of the baselines for all the different trolls, so you have a quick reference there if you need it. Law and justice and government, troll villages and foraging parties, child rearing and family life, and that then breaks down by specific troll type, which is really cool. We get food and clothing, and then we get a new pantheon of gods for trolls, which is really cool. Um, so we get some more information, and I do like the fact that Rollade's products seem to have been written very aware of how people and DMs are going to implement them. They know that a lot of people are just going to use these in their world and beg, borrow, and steal and put them in however they want. But they also want to try and give you tools for how to put them in to your world. For example, this one gives you an entirely new continent, even though you could just make the decision to use the trolls as presented in here, for example, as all of the trolls in your setting. But also, these could just be the trolls on this one continent. So, it talks about intertribal relations as well. Gives a section on race relations between trolls and other races, trade and crafts, illnesses and healing. Uh, yeah, I mean I think most of the humanoid species in AD&D, if you read the descriptions, would talk about their spellcasters and their leaders and stuff. It goes on then to talk about in here with the trolls, their views and practices of slavery. We then get some specific magic items for trolls. We have protection charms. We have charms of command. The clay jars. We then get some artifacts, like specific troll artifacts. We get the red claw, a mummified troll hand with a red stain in the form of a goat covering the back of the hand. Claw's origins are unknown, but is usually attributed to the time of the elder gods. Powers granted by the claw allow the bearer to perform as a fighter as twice his actual level of effectiveness. Properly wield any weapon. Enjoy an AC 2 steps lower than their normal, so +2, and add +2 to all saving throws. And then it talks about I was currently in the possession of the Mountain Troll Shaman, so it gives you a place to find it if you wanted to. There's then the Great Ice Spear, the Mirror of Location, the Portable Well, the Snare Rope of the Elder Trolls, and then a conclusion. And then we get an adventure, the Troll Ultimatum. And this is true to Roll-Aids' other products. There are usually several adventures throughout. This one titles at the top of it for 3 to 6 characters, skill levels 5 to 9. But each of these adventures seems to be written separately. For example, the Troll Ultimatum states that the adventure was designed for a party of 6 to 8 characters of 5th through 8th level of ability, with at least 3 magic items specifically designed to neutralize trolls. And then it's in this adventure that we get the map of Jovian Falls, which is the trade center for the island. Grumpy's Land, they have a lot of really good just solid fantasy RPG writing in here. Let's see. I do like their breakdown of their adventures. They will start with like a for the DM section. Kind of hard to see it. So a for the DM section, and then they'll go into for the DM background information, and they get down doing very list type presentations. So details are laid out pretty nicely for the DM only, DM notes, flow of the adventure. Then they give part one, locations, Jovian Falls. So you get some actual descriptions of various locations in Jovian Falls. We get the Wishing Well, the Troll Apothecary, Runestone, um, Troll Museum. But yeah, Haunted Forest, Snake Gardens, all sorts of cool places. Turns into a bit of a dungeon crawl. We get lots and lots of levels with individual maps on the pages, which is really kind of cool. I was thinking about this too. I mentioned last time that this is the sort of thing that is often commented as being really cool, that and advanced thinking in writing books and adventures nowadays. And it's clear here that they're doing it in the past. But then it occurred to me also, much like newer OSR supplements, the Roll Aids supplements were written in the absence of a outside cover that turned into the map. And I feel like, again, we sort of have that weird disconnect between the perceptions of the past and thinking that it was maybe them missing a point back in the day, when perhaps we're missing the point as modern thinkers, in that there was no real need for the micro map, the mini maps per page per encounter, when you had a large map set out in front of you as like the game screen, which you didn't have to flip back and forth to reference. It was just right there in your face. And books, which is what we publish nowadays and what a lot of third-party stuff was back in the day, they don't have the advantage of that removable cover like a classic TSR module does. And so you have to kind of have these mini maps throughout the dungeon, throughout the write-up, to be able to make them easily accessible and referenced. I think that in a lot of modern OSR products, I think part of the problem was early on you would get one printing of the map somewhere in the book, and then you'd have to keep flipping back and forth to reference that. And that's where the problem is. PDFs are great, but a lot of people still don't use them. I prefer not to use PDFs unless I'm playing at my computer. Yeah, I mean, I think it's good to have, I think you should have one big map somewhere in the book. That way the DM can see how everything relates to each other component. But the mini maps are definitely useful, and that continues throughout here. You get mini maps all throughout. PDFs are good. Yeah, I mean, I use them for reference. I think they're great for DMs who like to make a lot of notes that you don't have to mark up your original book. You can make handouts and maps like you're pointing out there. Yeah. This adventure goes on forever. This troll adventure goes on for quite a while. Very efficient use of space. Not a lot of wasted space here. So good, efficient dungeon design. And then we go into the orc section. This is the section written by Robert Asprin. At least the orc culture section is. And then the actual game mechanics are by Les K. And again, we get an introduction, we get history and creation, vital statistics. Basically breaks down the general game mechanics for them. We get their habitat, their food, weapons, a blurb on orc guilds of miners, blacksmiths guild, assassins guild, witch doctors and magic items, the orc spear, Interesting. The orc spear is enchanted so that when thrown, it will do double damage. It will strike and then return 60 feet to the wielder. It can also cast firebolt spell once per day, and has a range of 100 feet. Never misses and does 10 points of damage. Orc spear will work for anyone discovering the command word Osgada. However, it will turn the user evil, no save, when the command word is spoken. Interesting. We also have the Great Pick, Charms of Osga, Orc social structure, the clan, the tribe, the Orc nation, the government, different classes of orcs, the warrior elite, warriors, soldiers, hunters, and gatherers. And then we get an adventure, Taking Toll. Won't go into the details on this adventure, but again, it looks to be... This one looks to be sort of a minor little side adventure. It doesn't actually even mention... designed for a party of 6 characters, 4th to 7th level of ability, who should have standard armor weapons. It's interesting. I mentioned this on the previous book with dragons, that each adventure is clearly written as a separate thing and compiled into the book, because the way that they notate, for example, the level requirements differs from adventure to adventure. This one, for example, spells out the words 7th and 4th, whereas the other one used the abbreviated version. So yeah, it's yeah, you were mentioning them with Night Below. The printed poster map sounds like a really cool idea, but there needs to be a backup map. And then we get the adventure seems to be basically rooting out a bunch of orcs that are plaguing a road going through the kingdom. And so we have a crawl through a ruined keep, which is one of the nicer maps in the book. Really nicely rendered, lots of shading and stuff. And then the lower level also doesn't disappoint. So a nice adventure there. We get a few illustrations of locations in the adventure. Again, pretty effective, tight room design. I mean, you can see we got several rooms per page, each, very succinctly but effectively described. The null section is interesting. Their artists seem to have trouble with nulls. Either that or he disagreed with how nulls were portrayed in D&D, or they were trying to avoid some sort of copyright, who knows. But the nulls come across as rather happy puppy dog looking creatures. And I'm wondering if maybe just the artist wasn't great at illustrating combinations between humanoid and animal, or what. But we get into the nulls, we get right into it, and we get a huge we don't get a separate header section, it just immediately goes into game mechanic stats. Then we get a discussion on tribal living and home life, courtship, marriage, relationship between the sexes, food, pets, illness, healing, null biology, and religion. We then get a pantheon for nulls. We get one god, so a different god than Yinagu. Although he has an equally unpronounceable name, which is like Zermdolvrin. I don't know here if it comes across clearly or not, but yeah. So try and pronounce that. I don't know. I mean, I guess you could add that in and now have the nulls have 2 gods, because they could have Yinagu and that guy and whoever this person is. And then we get some discussion of relationship with other races, magic, and artifacts. They don't specify any particular magical artifacts. Trade and craft. The adventure in here is called Wedding Sacrifice, and I don't know, I haven't read it in its entirety, but it does offer to pay the party 20,000 gold pieces to return the guy's daughter safely to them. So it's a rescue mission. 20,000 gold. I think that'll motivate most players. We get a good section on for the DM, for the players. You get a map of the general area. It looks like a swamp adventure. Those are always fun. Swamp traps. That's kind of cool. A bunch of specific traps for swamps. Again, always full of useful information that you can lift and take into, take into your campaign. I mean, we may not have actually sat there and considered what traps in a swamp might be, but now we are presented with 3 different specific swamp type traps and how that would work. So that's kind of cool. Swamp encounters. They have you encounter a catoblepis in here. That's one way to kill off a party. Poisonous snakes, giant spiders, will-o-wisps, pretty typical stuff. Null villages. Another derpy happy puppy looking null. Clearly a design choice. So it's interesting. It turns out that the name of the adventure, Wedding Sacrifice, is there are nulls getting married who need a sacrifice to consecrate their marriage. So they kidnap the bride of this human bride to be their sacrifice. Another interesting design choice is in the Kobold section, which we're coming up onto now, which is written by Alan Noodleman. One of the best last names, in my opinion. I mean, Noodleman, come on. The kobolds are not the scaly devil puppies of classic AD&D. They're something a little bit more humanoid and along the lines of like being goblinoid. I will say that that's an approach to kobolds that was taken in 2E D&D. If you remember, in 2E they really tried to consolidate that concept of the goblinoid races, and kobolds in there are illustrated more as little horned humanoids as opposed to being devil puppies like they are, scaly devil puppies like they are in classic AD&D. That Catoblepis is really cool. I did find it interesting that Catoblepis appears to be one of those monsters from actual mythology. So that's kind of cool. We get Kobold Vital Statistics. Big old thing on Kobold society and structure. Much with more illustrations of strange little humanoid kobolds. I am a fan of the scaly devil puppy myself, but these guys work as well, and you can always sub them in easily enough. Kobold habitats, protective coloring. So evidently these kobolds, as interpreted here, have a 90% chance of remaining unnoticed if immobile. Traps and magic. We get several new magic items. We have Moret's rings. We get a Horn of Farat. Ring of Weight. Interesting. What's one of the items which the gnomes taught kobolds how to make? When worn, the mass of the wearer will increase to that of a large horse, with a corresponding strength increase for movement only. Thus, an opponent expecting a normal kobold will be caught off balance when weighing as much as a horse charges into battle. Damage from a charge is 2d6, while falling on an opponent will cause 3d6 damage. The rings are these rings are the most common kobold magic items, which one in 100 kobolds is having them. That's kind of fun. That's kind of a gotcha item. You're expecting to fight a bunch of kobolds and they hit you like literally like a horse. Siren, wee woo, wee woo, wee woo. Yeah, I think there's a whole section there, Dirty History and Hobbies of Animals, that people were writing about and illustrating based on reputation, like the camel pard, which is the early description of the giraffe. Um, I have been tempted to write the camel part up as an actual monster in D&D. I think it'd be cool. Although I bet you in the Roll Aids books for the Monsters of Myth and the series that they have, the camel part might be in there. Kobold Ambush, Kobold Retreat. It's interesting. It specifically has a section on Kobold Retreat talking about how one of the most important parts of a kobold attack is the retreat. Let's see. Then the adventure is the tower. Looks like dwarves sending you into an old dwarven tower that has been taken over by kobolds. This tower is very simplistically rendered map-wise. Simple grid map. It actually reminds me a lot of the map style for Expedition to the Barrier Peaks, which I'm sure Grumpy will roll his eyes about after reconstructing those maps to deal with the inaccuracies and stuff. Lots of trap stuff in this one with the kobolds. Then we get goblins and hobgoblins, who get one of the shortest sections in the book. I think that's a fair assessment because I feel like out of all of the humanoid species in original D&D, goblins and hobgoblins, along with orcs, are probably some of the best covered, and orcs got a pretty decent coverage in here. But, or did they? Yeah, they did. But no, I mean, so I don't know how much you really need, how much more you really need for goblins and hobgoblins. Let's see. The typical stuff where we get descriptions of goblin kind, goblins, hobgoblins, history and origin, skills, fighting styles, hobgoblin rule over the hobgoblin race relations, homes, family relations, hobgoblins. We have more religion in here. We get a bunch of new deities for things. An interesting deity in here is there's a goblin deity that appears as a young innocent maiden of tender years. So basically a young human. They're a very deceitful, backstabbing deity, but they actually have the outward appearance of a human. The Illyrian Forest of Intrigue, or Illyrian Forest of Intrigue. So this is an adventure into the Elven Forest. 6 to 8 players, 5 to 8 levels. So it looks like you're searching for a series of rings. Oh no, wait. You are offered a set of magical rings. Kind of cool. To head into the Elven Forest with these. The Well of Life. This adventure really feels like it just really pushes the limit of the book because it's like goes all the way to the very end and then we just get the end of the book. I did read the description of the Well of Life earlier, and it's interesting because it's a restorative well. It can heal, resurrect, or even reincarnate. Like if you put a recently dead body into it, it'll resurrect it. If you put a long dead body into it, it'll actually reconstruct it into something else, like the reincarnation spell. Drinking the water over a course of time halts your aging, but you have to then continue to drink it periodically to maintain that, or else all of the stopped time comes back rushing in yeah, so I mean that is Dark Folk. I know it's not a lot. It's hard to really get a true flavor feel for the game or the book with this kind of a flip through, but it's all I can really manage. I don't have a setup for like a top down or anything like that. I would say again, Rolaids books are really worth getting and adding to your AD&D collection. They're just full of really good ideas. Um, if you're not going to use them completely and as written, um, there's plenty to beg, borrow, and steal from them. Each one of them presents several adventures, which you could run as a campaign. In some cases, they're set up to run as a campaign. I think the elves or the ice elves book, maybe the dwarves book, um, has several adventures in it that are designed to be run as a campaign. This one is all a bunch of individual adventures because each adventure taps into the specific humanoid species that it just went ahead and described. Um, but yeah, I think they're really worth getting just for the amount of useful, usable information you get with them. Whether it's new magic items, new takes on classic D&D races. Some cases there are new classes if you're wanting to add those to your campaign. Magic items, spells. Occasionally they'll slip in some new monsters. Like I was pointing out with the dragons last time, there's a bunch of new monsters included in there that are associated with dragons and their lairs, but you don't have to use them that way. So yeah, there are a lot of good reasons to check out the Rolaids books, and I certainly do suggest getting into them if you can. Uh, so we got about 15 minutes left. I'm going to do my usual thing and open up for questions and and uh, let's. I mean, any uh, any specific things that you want to know, ask about. Um, Also, are there any particular Rolaids books that you would like me to try and get a hold of and do coverage on? Because, I mean, certainly I'm looking to collect as many as I can, but that collection process is going to slow down a bit as I get into the more expensive books. Even the individual adventures are expensive. In fact, some cases, the adventures themselves, which tend to be thinner books, are as much or more expensive than some of the supplements. I was looking through some of the stuff on my watch list. Evidently, they did a full supplement on psionics, which is interesting. Um, some of the more common books are, of course, can be cheaper. I mentioned yesterday, or not yesterday, but the last time, that I think the Dragons and the Giants books are common because they were associated with the Grenadier range of miniatures, but I also feel like that makes them less available, or if not necessarily less available, but more desirable on the secondary market because they have a two-pronged collectability. You've got the role players and the miniatures guys who are going to want them. Hey, Manfred, late as usual, but yeah, I think there is actually a Rolaids book on Lizardmen too. That one does not seem to be overly common based on how infrequently it shows up in my search lists. So we'll see. Um, so I did notice comment on the Mukapi Dirty History and Hobbies. That's cool. Oh, I think that so. I I really well. I'm about at the end there, Manfred. So um, the I think that if there was one culture I really, oh, not cultures, if there was one, I really still am waiting for somebody to tackle Native American myth and legend uh, in depth for a D&D product. It's a personal favorite of mine. I've always had a thing for it. I don't know, coming from the Pacific Northwest, where you have such close proximity to a lot of really good native culture, um, it it bit me. I don't know if it bites everybody from the Northwest, but also I think part of that comes from the fact that up there you've got Bigfoot myths, which then dovetail into Native American myths. We have so many locations that are still carrying their native names. If anybody's tried to pronounce stuff from the Pacific Northwest, Stillaguamish, Skykomish, Squim, Skookumchuck, Enumclaw, all these places, are all common parlance over in Washington. So, but there's such a wide variety of Native American folklore and the creatures and the critters that go with that. There are also commonalities across those cultures, which, in terms of writing up a game supplement, um, you could easily. It's always, and I think this is possibly one of the reasons that this sort of a thing doesn't get tackled. Who's going to be your author? Nowadays, there's always a worry that if you're writing from outside the culture, that you're not doing it justice. And if you are writing from outside the culture and you want to do it justice and you want to be taken seriously, the amount of work you have to do far exceeds what's necessary, really. Um, at least in my thinking, because it's kind of like having to, it basically you have to spend a little bit more time and energy proving your work. There's always a danger too when you're dealing with multiple cultures and trying to write sort of a supplement that draws from multiples from many of them. If you genericize things, then you can be guilty of misrepresenting cultures or oversimplifying or whitewashing, whatever you want to call it. And so there's a bit of a minefield there. I would love it if there would be a group of indigenous folks who would come in and write that setting. Kind of like what we've seen recently, a number of Eastern European inspired RPG supplements that are being written from Eastern Europe. So I feel like you're going to get at least some level of authenticity there, or maybe niche knowledge that you wouldn't necessarily get from an outsider unless that outsider was at a high level of education and understanding. We did see this with Southeast Asia. There was the Thousand Islands supplement that was written, which is very Indonesia inspired, very cool. It was system generic. It didn't actually have any system written into it. It was just a campaign setting. That was really cool. Unfortunately, that creative team imploded, exploded, however you want to call it. But yeah, there are so many cool monsters in Native mythology. A lot of them have been brought into, for example, 5th edition through Cobalt Press. Cobalt Press did a really good job of tapping into just about every belief system, every folklore out there when they did their creature codexes and stuff like that for 5th edition. We got the Aklut is in there. We've got yeah, there's a bunch of monsters. But there's tons of giants in native myth and belief system that are different than giants in European culture. Yeah. I don't. I disagree on the Western Native Americans, Manfred. I feel that we may. I think we see a lot from the Northwest and
up to and including like the Inuit, uh, up in Alaska and Canada and stuff. Um, uh, yeah, I mean, if you're talking about Western, like the Mesoamerican ones, yes, we do see a lot of those. I think Mesoamerican stuff appeals to RPG makers because it has structures. Um, you have the prerequisite architecture for fantasy adventure. You've got ancient ruined cities, you've got pyramids, you've got religions that are relatively well documented and easily fetishized, fantasized, whatever you want to call it, with sacrifice and all of that stuff that lends itself well to sword and sorcery style pulpy storytelling, which is where the roots of fantasy come from. With a lot of Native American stuff from elsewhere in the country or the continent, um, it gets tricky because you don't have a lot of permanent structure. Um, your natives end up being less urban dwelling city folk, and they become more akin. I mean, I hate to say it, but they become kind of like a whole bunch of wood elves out there. Right? I mean, they're in touch with nature, and they have their own belief systems, and they don't have big cities. They live in the woods or on the plains. I mean, this is the very sweeping bullet point, coverage of how they're usually perceived, not actually how they are. Um, oh, film and media, that's true, but I think we also see tons of uh, Iroquois and Mohawk and all of that stuff. All of the northeastern Indians too, natives too, because those are also written about. We see plenty of plains now, and also keep in mind the plains is closer to the east than it is to the west. It's not even the middle of the country. So um, the I think honestly we get very little in media about the Northwest Indians, unless you start telling stories about like we get plenty of Arctic stuff because frozen north scary, you know. But I mean there's a fair amount of variation. Like I think one of the big problems too is that for the longest time, native cultures were often used as convenient spooks and oogie boogies in stories. I've been rewatching X Files recently, and I'm watching some of the episodes that tie into native stuff in some of the seasons, and I'm like, yeah, that's a little cringeworthy nowadays. But the same could be said in that series also from like there's one episode I just watched recently that dealt with Chinese American culture, and I think that is always the problem. And Grumpy can speak to this because his coverage of the old pulps demonstrates this a lot. There is a lot of deeply seated problematic writing that has been done in the past when it comes to cultures other than white American culture or white European culture. And this is not me getting up on some sort of race relations step. This is just being honest about the problems of the past. So when writing something in the modern age, you are burdened to a great degree by all of those missteps that were made in the past. You have to be very careful, and it can be daunting. I have a campaign setting outlined for uh, a very Pacific Northwest inspired with bits of northeastern forest natives involved, kind of worked into a. It's a fantasy setting, so it can draw from multiple places, just like you know. But I didn't go forward with writing it or trying to publish it because I realized that the amount of work that I would have to go through was more than I really wanted to do, but also more than I was capable of doing. I mean, that is time, that is effort, that is ultimately money. I feel like writing anything of that nature without engaging some sort of editorial process for the sake of authenticity, as well as and buzzword incoming sensitivity, to make sure that in my limited scope and point of reference that I don't accidentally write something really bad, you know, um,
and repeat the missteps and the crimes of the past. I mean, it's been a lot of Orientalism for when you're dealing with Eastern cultures. There's been a lot of um, fetishistic writing when it comes to Native Americans. That you see it all the time on Facebook posts. You can see it even when trying to paint Native folks in a positive light. It often goes to this weird fetishized version of them where like, oh, they didn't have words for crime and they lived in peace with the land and they used every bit of it, which is all scientifically and academically inaccurate. They did have crimes, they did have punishment, they did have concepts of property. It may not have been the same as Europeans, but they had to have it to some degree because people owned things and possessed things. And we know that, for example, they didn't always use every part of the animal because we know that they ran entire herds of buffalo off of a fucking cliff. Now, granted, the damage they were doing there was far less than what was done intentionally later on. But again, that illustrates that slippery slope of fetishizing a culture through even when trying to do right by them, which would be my intent in writing that kind of a supplement, would be to bring to light something that's often ignored for the sake of fantasy adventure gaming. But the other problem is we're also dealing with something that for a lot of people is not myth and legend. It's their actual current living belief system. And that's problematic in and of itself. I may be writing about a monster, but to somebody who lives and believes that, that is part of that may as well be an angel or a saint or a Holy Spirit. That is something that they literally believe in, and so there's a balance. I don't want to get too much on this. I ended up on a ramble, but okay. Yeah, I mean, slant. That is the thing. Even in attempting to paint people in a positive light, because we've often done them wrong in the past, or because of a misunderstanding, we sometimes can overcompensate or oversimplify, either intentionally because there's an agenda, there's a point, there's some sort of motivation, or inadvertently we're trying to do right by them, and then we fail to then we're trying to write them as we're not trying to write them as monsters, but then we end up writing them as some sort of angelic, otherworldly, inhuman thing, and we dehumanize them again, but in a positive light rather than a negative. Squirrel Hermit. I disagree. I think that is an attitude that is easy to come to from a position of no harm, but like I feel like it's too easy to say it's just a game, it doesn't mean anything. But um, I've seen just for fun hurt people, and we're not talking about sensitive people. We're talking about people who maybe don't know, aren't old enough to understand. Um, how they represent French Canadians. I'm not even sure I would even know the difference. But so yeah, I just went to a place where I didn't expect it to go, but good conversation nonetheless. That's what we do with that last 15 minutes or so. I do need to wrap things up because I do actually have plans later on today, and I have to get a couple things done before I go do those plans. So with that, I appreciate everybody who showed up today to watch the overview of the Dark Folk book. And the brief little discussion here towards the end. Next week I may be back or not. I don't know. Depends on if I can come up with something to talk about. But I will see you all later and get out and game.